Hello everyone, I am Dr. Jaskirat from Department of RISE CGC. This is the lecture 1 of the course How to Become an Effective Researcher. Now, the main goal of this lecture is to provide advice on how to structure your article or manuscript properly. Alright, so we'll discuss all the key elements, what all are covered up while you design the manuscript. So we'll start with the lecture. Okay, so in this module, I'll help you understand the type of content each element should contain. So we'll also share the tips on how you can maximize their potential, such as key points to consider when writing your research article. Okay, now the research article contains many sections and each one has a definite purpose. So at the beginning we have is title, abstract, keyword sections, which actually play all important roles in allowing the article to be easily found, indexed and advertised to potential readers. And actually making these sections informative, interactive and effective so that your article is easy to index and search. The main text of the article is summarized by the following headings: introduction, methods, results and discussion. Now this is where you must present your work and convey the main messages and findings effectively. Note that the reader's time is not basically unlimited. So we have to make our article as concise as possible. The last group of section brings up the end of the manuscript and includes conclusion, acknowledgements, references and supporting materials. However, these are just artificial groupings and the order might change depending on which journal you are putting in, right? So some journals request the discussion section to be continued, combined with the conclusion or results section. So others may make it an independent section. It all depends on which journal you are choosing. Also, there are different arrangements of the order. So we must read the guide for authors for the specific criteria for the regarding journal we are choosing. Okay. Now let's look at each section of what it contains, starting with the titles. Now there are certain characteristics of effective titles. They should actually attract the reader's attention, contain the fewest possible words, should be adequately describe content, be informative but concise, identifies the main issue and not use technical jargons and abbreviations, but we actually should use the formal language which is known to all. So it is always advisable to discuss the title with all of the co-authors. Always remember that editors and reviewers don't like titles that make no sense, okay, or fail to represent the subject matter adequately. And maybe even more important, you want the appropriate audience to actually read your paper. So if the title is not accurate, the right people may not read it and the community might be unaware of your work. So this could even lead to lower citations than what your paper deserves. Now, determining the order of authors in a paper can actually vary by discipline, culture. But the general rule is that the first author is the main person who conducts or supervises the data collection, presentation and interpretation of the results, and sometimes also puts it together the paper for the submission. Now, the corresponding author can be the first author or sometimes could be a senior author from the institution. So basically, the corresponding author doesn't decide that he is the main author or not. So mainly the person who submits it is the corresponding author. Now next is we should always avoid the ghost authorship, which comes under the procedure of bad listing. Now what is ghost authorship? Ghost authorship mainly means excluding authors who actually participated in the work. And we should also avoid gift authorship, which means including authors who did not contribute to the work. Therefore, we must always be consistent in how you write the author's name. Okay. So coming on to the keywords. Now, keywords are basically labels or tags for your manuscript and are mainly used by indexing and abstracting services. So avoid keywords that have broad meaning. So keywords should be very specific enough to give someone a very quick idea about what is the content of your paper. Always use abbreviations that are firmly established in the field of study. Okay. Also check the guide for authors for specifics on which keywords should be used. Now, basically, this is a table which contains actual examples of keywords that are associated with an article taken from elsewhere. Now, the title of the article is A Generalized Method for the Segmentation of Exudates from Pathological Retinal Fundus Images. The keywords are exudates. Now, exudates itself shows that some type of pathology. Diabetic retinopathy, it means we are dealing with diabetic retinopathy from retinal fundus images. The algorithm which we are using is segmentation, images, retinal fundus image. Now the keyword could be the part of the title also. And lesion and image based evaluation, it basically defines the evaluation criteria. Now whosoever are associated with retinal fundus images or image processing field, they'll understand the evaluation criteria. They're mainly lesion and image based. They'll understand that concept, right? Once we are submitting such paper with such keywords, it broadly tells you what is going to come in the paper. All right. So now these keywords are firmly established in the field of diabetic retinopathy. So we should always take care what type of keywords which we are using. Coming on to the abstract. Now, if the title catches a reader's attention, the next thing they check is the abstract. Now, the abstract is always freely available in any electronic abstracting and indexing services. Name any, either Scopus, PubMed, Medline, elsewhere, anywhere. So the abstract is mainly a single paragraph which summarizes the problems, methods, results, and the conclusion. Now, the abstracts can act as an advertisement for your article since it is freely available via any online searching or indexing. So you should make sure that it is catchy and accurate and as possible to have the greatest impact. Okay. An abstract which is written very clearly will strongly encourage the reader to read the rest of your paper. So also it should be as brief as possible. So taking the time to write the abstract very carefully, many authors write the abstract at the last so that it accurately reflects the content of the paper. So we should take care while writing the abstract. Next comes out to the, now let's look at the process of building an article. Now, the sequence of writing the article is not the same as reading it. For most scientific fields, the most efficient way is to regard the manuscript as a wall and build it, you can say brick by brick. You start with producing your tables, figures, captions, legends, right? Then you can go on to describe the methods used, the results you have found out, the discussion, and followed by their results, right? The conclusion should flow on this, from this very easily, right? So then you write the introduction as to where your work fits into the field as a whole. Then it comes out to be, the finally you have is the title, abstract, and keywords. Now this process of building the article is easier. It's more logical and more effective than trying to write an article in the sequence it is read. Okay. Now the introduction is mainly used to provide context for your manuscript and convince readers why your work advances in a field of study. Now be concise in the introduction, but give the reader enough information to understand why your work is important. Introductions of letters can be shorter, sometimes only one paragraph. Now this section should not be a history lesson, right? But you do need to introduce the main research publications on which your work is based. So cite a couple of original and important works, including recent review articles, like to give the reader a sense of how your work fits into the literature. However, take care to not make citations to irrelevant references, including your own. All right. So make sure you clearly address the following, like what is the problem you are ultimately trying to solve? What are we actually contributing to the society? Identify the solutions and the limitations. Or are there any solutions? And if so, what is the best solution and what are the limitations? What is your work trying to achieve? Provide a perspective that is consistent with the journal where you are submitting. All right. So although it can be tempting to reuse introductions from your previous papers on similar studies, every paper should present a new result and the work should be specifically motivated. And this requires a unique introduction every time. Okay, now the methods section describes actually how you studied the problem. It is important to be detailed. A knowledgeable reader should be able to reproduce the experiment. Any previously published procedures should not be rewritten in detail, right? So those can be noted in the references or you can describe them in the supporting materials section. The equipment and materials used in the experiments should be identified along with their sources if there is the chance for variability of quality of these items, right? So the work is computational or theoretical, code, computational or analytical methods should be very clearly described in the methods section, all right? Now, if your work involves experiments such as humans or animals, it must follow applicable ethics standards, such as the most recent version of the Helsinki Declaration relevant to the animal experimentation guidelines, right? So in this, approval of a local ethics committee was required and should always be specified at this point in the manuscript, like covering letter or the online submission system. You need to mention that. However, even approval of the local ethics committee does not guarantee that the editors will also agree that the work was done in the acceptable manner. Another example of ethical was if you are, for example, I mentioned the retinal fundus images work. Even if you are using the retinal images of the patients from a local hospital, there is a whole procedure which we need to follow for getting the ethical clearance. The institute which is using the data needs to get the ethical clearance, needs to produce that we will not be using in any harmful way. The candidate who is conducting the research has to get the ethical clearance from the hospital, and the further hospital has to get the validation from the patients. So there's a procedure which we need to follow. All right, so we should be very careful related to that. Okay, coming on to the results. So you should present the results that are essential mainly to the discussion, right? Which means that only data of primary importance should be shared. Data of secondary importance should be put in the, you can put that in the supporting or the supplementary material section. Also, do not attempt to hide data in the hope of saving it for later paper, or you might want to split the results of one project into many papers. Now, if you do this, this mainly dilutes the effect of the work and it results in the lower quality papers. And you may also lose evidence that reinforces your conclusions, right? So you must use subheadings to keep results of the same type together. This will make the results easier to review and read. Number these subsections for the convenience of internal cross-referring. Decide on a logical order of the data that tells you a clear story, right? Also highlight findings that further understanding in the field or those that differ from previous findings and explain any unexpected results. Illustrations including figures and tables are the most efficient way to present your results. Yeah. Okay. Now your data are the driving force of the paper. Therefore, your figures and illustrations are very critical and they should be used for essential data only. The legend of the figure should be brief and should contain sufficient explanatory details to explain the figure without the need to refer to the text. Use color only when necessary. If different line styles can clarify the meaning, don't use colors, okay? Or other effects that can distract from the content and may not appear when printed in black and white. So don't give it a blinge under your paper, right? My main point is that. Then if we come out to the graphs, now graphs are mainly used to compare the experimental results with those of the previous works or with calculated or theoretical values, right? So graphs should not appear crowded, right? Try to present at most 3 to 4 data sets per figure. Use well selected scales, label the axes clearly, and use different symbols so that one can quickly discriminate between the different data sets, okay? So often tables give the actual experimental results. Do not include long, boring tables unless absolutely necessary, right? Otherwise, you can put it in the supplementary materials if you really want and make them as easy to read as possible. Every photograph or image you're putting in your paper should be presented with a scale marker and resolution. And if I talk about the resolution, you should make sure that the resolution is proper. It is not cut, copy, paste image, right, from PDF or somewhere else. So you should be created and then pasted, right? Okay. Coming on to the discussions part. Now, this is the most important section of the article I define, right? So this is where you get the chance to, what you can say, you get to sell your data. A huge number of manuscripts are rejected because the discussion is weak or only includes mere description of the results. At times it looks like that discussion and results are same only, right? So make sure the discussion corresponds to and complements the results, but do not simply repeat the results here, okay? Compare other published results with your own and do not ignore work in disagreement with yours, right? So confront it, convince the reader that you are correct or better. We should be very careful while we should be very careful not to use the following, right? Statements that go beyond what results can support. This is, don't put redundant data. Non-specific expressions such as higher temperature, lower rate, good efficiency. I mean, they are not acceptable. You need to put the quantitative descriptions, right? Okay, next comes up with new terms not already defined or mentioned in the paper. You cannot put them. Speculations on possible interpretations that are based on, let's say, imagination rather than rooted in fact and carefully explained in the article. So your article should always be supportive of the facts which you are putting in the results, right? So if you need to revise the results or discussion, this may involve a lot of work and require further experimentation, derivations, simulations, right? So sometimes you may not be able to clarify your data, your idea just in words because some critical items have not been studied substantially. Make sure your message is complete before you start writing or submitting your article, right? So it might happen when your article is reviewed, the reviewers might, ask you to do the whole of the experimentation again. And that is a hell lot of a procedure because creating something new is easy as compared to breaking it and then building on it again. Okay. So next come out of the conclusion. Now conclusion is mainly used to show how your work advances the field of study. Now be clear in the conclusion to help the reviewers and editors judge your work and its impact. Provide clear justification for your work how your work advances in the field. Now this can be achieved by indicating its uses, extensions, your applications of the work. Could be anything, right? So do not just repeat the abstract here. The abstract and conclusion serve different purposes, although some of the messages may be mentioned could be same, right? So also don't list the experimental results here. Trivial restatements of your results are highly unacceptable in this section, right? Also, you might suggest future experiments that build on your work, and point out any relevant experiments that may already be underway. Okay. Coming on to the acknowledgements. Now, the acknowledgements section, it's simple. It's include the name of the important entities you want to acknowledge, such as the advisors, financial supporters, proofreaders. For example, if you're working in the field of health and technology, health and technology are, combined these days. It's coming up highly these days, right? So you need to acknowledge health professionals when you're publishing your paper. Okay. Now, the reference list is where everybody knows that, right? Where you cite the main scientific publications on which your work is based, right? So take note that there are now some society published journals that also require a conflict of interest statement to be placed before the references section. All right. So some tips for having a proper reference list could be, do not include too many references, especially if they are only tangentially related to your work. Be very careful. Always ensure that you have fully absorbed and understood the material you are referencing. Do not rely on reading experts or isolated sentences. Know what you are referencing, right? So avoid excessive self-citations of your own work from a single region or might be a single institute. So also the main point is you have to check the guide for authors to ensure the proper format, right? So presentation in the correct format is the responsibility of the author, not the editor, right? So make the editor's work easier and they'll appreciate the effort done by you. Okay. Developing an article can often be labor intensive because it involves finding and sorting other relevant articles and correctly preparing the more formal sections such as referencing, right? So similarly, making contact with the right colleagues to help contextualize results, pool resources, or clarify language may also be challenging. For these, you can take help from Mendeley. Now, what is Mendeley? If you've heard about it, it's a free reference manager and an academic social network tool. All right. So the Mendeley Reference Manager generates citations and bibliographies in Word, OpenOffice, LaTeX, whatever you want to, whatever you field, the platform you're working in. So you can search an open catalog of millions of papers, import them, organize your references from the online databases, and add files. Also, you can add the offline files, the hard PDF files from your hard drive. You can also use Mendeley to connect it with your colleagues and securely share papers, your annotations, anything. You can write collaboratively without having to constantly email back and forth. You can use Mendeley's social network to identify potential collaborators also. You'll be, once you have identified from the particular field, you'll be receiving mails time and again from them. So that really supports the process, right? Okay, so I'm summarizing this lecture. So to summarize, structuring your article properly will make the work clearer and will have a greater impact in the field. So make sure that each section of the paper fulfill its purpose clearly and concisely. Your title and abstract always advertise. I've made it very clear. So your work and attract people to read the full article. Okay, so keywords are the labels or tags for your article that gives someone a very quick idea about the content of your article and are used by many indexing and abstracting services. And they do have an impact on search engine optimization, which supports readers to find your article very quickly. So pay close attention to each word you use. Okay. So the main text of the article includes introduction, methods, results, discussion, everything, right? So the discussion is where you can really showcase the importance of your results and explain how they advance understanding in your field. So it's very important. Okay. Okay. And last is the conclusion section, and is mainly used to show how your work advances in the field of study. The acknowledgement section include the name of the important entities you want to acknowledge, your advisors, your financial supporters, proofreaders, etc. The references section is where you cite the main scientific publications to which your work is based on, and the supporting material sections includes additional information like such as previously published procedures and secondary data. So in the next lecture we'll be coming up, we'll be focusing totally on the references, right? So here I have given the main idea of what are the main key elements of your structure of the structure of the manuscript is. So in the next lecture we'll be detailing how you can reference your how can manage your references using various reference managers which are available online. So I hope you have got the broad idea of what a manuscript is in this lecture. Thank you.